November? Yes, sir. Going home. You gonna be at the anniversary celebration at Brother Roberto's church? Are you going there before you leave? Okay. We normally celebrate like the first Sunday in November. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Okay. All right then. So, anyway, if you have your Bible, turn to the book of John, chapter number 18. Book of John, chapter number 18, in verse number 28. It says, Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early. And they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. And Pilate then went out unto them and said, What accusation bring ye against this man? They answered and said unto him, If he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him unto thee. Then said Pilate unto them, Take ye him and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die. Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, and called Jesus, said unto him, Art thou the King of the Jews? Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and the chief priest have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. Pilate saith unto him, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews, and saith unto them, I find in him no fault at all. But ye have a custom that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will ye therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Then cried they all again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers platted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe, and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they smote him with their hands. Pilate therefore went forth again, and saith unto him, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that ye may know that I find no fault in him. Then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate saith unto them, Behold the man. When the chief priests therefore and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, Take ye him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the judgment hall, and saith unto Jesus, Whence art thou? But Jesus gave him no answer. Then saith Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee, and have power to release thee? Jesus answered, Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin. And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whosoever maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth and set him down in the judgment seat in the place that is called the pavement, but in the Hebrew Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he saith unto the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Then delivered he him therefore unto them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away. So, again, obviously we missed, I believe it was last week, we missed last week for the anniversary dinner, but the last several weeks that we've been in Sunday school, we've been studying on this, and we looked at Matthew and Mark, and Matthew and Mark are pretty much the same. They're pretty much the same when you read this passage right here, when you read their account of this passage right here. They're pretty much the same, where it's basically that Jesus gives no answer at all, and Pilate marvels that he gives no answer. But then when you get to Luke, which we looked at the last time we were looking at, you see a little bit more to the story. You see a little bit more in the story that Pilate is looking for a way out. He's looking for a way out, and he realizes that, he hears that Jesus was from Galilee, and so he's like, oh, was he a Galilean? And he sends him to Herod, and Herod was excited. If you remember, Herod was excited to see Jesus. He'd been looking forward to the opportunity to see Jesus, because basically he wanted Jesus to perform a trick. He wanted Jesus to perform a miracle. And so he'd heard about the miracles, and he wanted Jesus to do some kind of miracle in front of him and entertain him. And so Jesus refused. He refused to do that for Herod. So Herod sends him back. But we know, based off of the account in Luke, Pilate says, I find no fault in him. Then he sends him to Herod and said, Herod found no fault in him. Then he tried him again and said, I find no fault in him. And so you're going to see that kind of line up here. And so you have to just kind of understand that there was a period of time in between John 18 and John 19 where Jesus goes to Herod, even though it's not written in the book of John. But we see in the book of John, we actually see there was much more of a conversation than you see in any of the other Gospels. In any of the other Gospels, you don't see the conversation that we have, that we get in the book of John. And so there is an actual conversation that is had. And we know the one big difference, I guess, in Matthew and Mark is, I believe in Matthew, that it gives the account of Pilate's wife saying, basically don't have nothing to do with this just man. You need to let this go. This is not good. She had a dream, and she's like, don't have anything to do with this just man. And so, but you get into the book of John right here, and they bring in verse number 28. They lead Jesus away, and again, I believe they let him bound away. I believe that he was bound, and that way they could make a show just of, obviously it's very early in the morning, so there's not going to be that many people about, but the people that were up and about were going to see Jesus being led away, bound, and so they bring him to the judgment hall, and they refuse to go in. And again, I know we've talked about this before, but it's fascinating to me how that they were violating so many of Moses' law. They were violating so many of those things that they should have never violated. Obviously, they brought up false accusations. They didn't just bring them up. They looked for someone to bring up false accusation. They didn't even look for someone to bring up a true accusation, because they knew they didn't have anyone who could bring up a true accusation. They brought up these false accusations, and over and over and over they violated, again, I mean, it's not like the United States of America where you have rights, but they violated Jesus' rights by violating their own law in their effort to condemn him when he was under trial before the Sanhedrin. And now here they are. They bring him before Pilate, and they're like, oh, wait a second, we want to accuse him, but we're not coming in because it's the Passover, and we don't want to defile ourselves. I'm sorry, but every person that played any part in that had already defiled themselves, much worse than doing just some minor infraction that would keep them from eating the Passover. They're desiring to have the Son of God crucified. They're desiring to have the Son of God crucified. They're desiring to have an innocent man crucified. They're desiring to have God's Son crucified. And yet they're worried about, oh, well, we can't go in there because we can't eat the Passover. Do you really think, do you think that God was pleased with them to say, whenever they went later that day and went and ate the Passover, that God was like, I tell you what, I sure am glad that they're holding that form of religion right there. I sure am glad they're eating that meal right there. That just makes me so happy with those people. No, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous, but yet they were holding to that form of religion that they had. And so they wouldn't even come out, and so Pilate has to come out to them. And he comes out to them in verse number 29. He said, "What accusation bring ye against this man?" So again, and think about this is early in the morning. I don't know. I mean, for most of us, maybe there's a few people in here that are early risers and are happily early risers. I know Brother Tyrone and them work very early in the morning, but you know, not everyone is happily an early riser. And so, I mean, you can imagine. I mean, here's basically the governor of Judea right now. He's the governor for Rome, and he's over these people. And here they are. They're bringing their religious problem to him, because that's what Jesus was to the Jews. He was a religious problem. They're bringing their religious problem to him, and they're bringing it to him not in the middle of the day, Cody, not in the afternoon when he'd already been up and he'd already ate his breakfast and already ate his lunch and he was in a pretty good mood. No, I mean early in the morning they're pounding on the door, demanding judgment. And so Pilate comes out to them and said, "What accusation? Tell me the accusation." And so we know from the other passages what they accused him of, but here it says, they answered and said to him, "If he were not a malefactor." Basically, they didn't even come up with a real accusation. They basically said he's an evildoer, which is what a malefactor is. He's an evildoer, and if he wasn't an evildoer, we wouldn't have brought him to you. We don't have to have an accusation. And think about this. I mean, again, they're looking for, and they're going to announce it here in just a second, they're looking for capital punishment. That's what they were looking for. And lawfully, because they were under the Roman rule, they couldn't put someone to death lawfully, based off of their law. If they truly wanted to put someone to death and do it correctly under Roman rule, they were going to have to get one of the Roman governors to consent to it. And so that's why they had to change their tactics from what they accused Jesus of when he was before the Sanhedrin. The Romans didn't care about that. They were pagans. They didn't care a thing. They didn't care a bit about that. And so that's why they had to change their tactics. But so in the beginning, they bring him before Pilate, and they hadn't even really come up with a good accusation yet. They just said he's an evildoer. And so then in verse number 31, then Pilate said unto him, "Take ye him and judge him according to your law." Take you him and judge him according to your law. Pilate's like, he figured out very early on that this was a religious dispute. This was not truly a matter of Jesus, was trying to usurp authority over Caesar. That's not what this was at all. And Pilate figured that out very early on in this, and just based off their accusations, they kept throwing things out. Whenever they say that he wouldn't allow people to give tribute to Caesar. Well, we know that was a lie. We looked at that the last time we were here in Sunday school. We looked at the passage, I believe it's Luke 20. I think it is Luke 20, where they come up with their spies. And the spies, the very first question they ask him, Luke 20:20, and they watched and sent forth spies, which should feign themselves just men, that they would take hold of his word, so that they might deliver him on the power and authority of the governor. And they asked him, saying, Master, I'll skip that, is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar or no? But he perceived their craftiness, and said unto them, Why tempt ye me? Show me a penny, whose image and subscription hath it? They answered and said, Caesar. And he said unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar things which be Caesar's, unto the God the things which be of God. And so we know from that, right, it was just a straight up lie. He never said not to render the things to Caesar. He never said that. He never tried that at all. But they didn't care. It didn't matter to them. They just wanted him crucified. And Pilate figures it out pretty quick. So he says to them, Take ye him and judge him according to your law. Well, they had, and they'd unjustly judged him according to their law, and they'd unjustly convicted him, and unjustly they said he's worthy of death. And the Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death. Now this changes things here, because now here's Pilate, and he's there, and he's talking to them, and he realizes that Jesus was delivered for envy. Jesus was delivered for envy, and so they've got him, and they've got him there, and here he is, and there's no way Herod heard about Jesus and Pilate didn't hear about him. There's no way that Herod knew about Jesus and Pilate didn't hear some things about him. And those things that he heard, unless he was speaking to these the chief priest and the scribes, unless he was talking, the things that he had to hear were good things. The things that he had to hear were good things, because Jesus didn't do any bad things. He'd never done any bad things. And the only people that very few people were offended at Jesus, but those that were offended were mostly religious people. Most of the people that were offended at Jesus were religious people. And Jesus offended them because they held to their religion, and they justified themselves with their works before God. And so he offended them, but this changes things whenever Pilate realizes, wait a second, they're serious here. They're wanting me to put him to death. And in verse number 33, so Pilate says, all right, I'm going to bring him in. So he brings Jesus into the judgment hall in verse 33. Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again and called Jesus and said, Art thou the King of the Jews? In verse 34, Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? Now, again, when you read commentaries, it's all over the map right here, because again, we're speculating. Sometimes I do okay, sometimes I don't do okay. I mean, we're reading words on a paper. I mean, it's hard sometimes if someone sends you a text message and says, what's your deal? Do you know, are they mad because they said, what's your deal? Or are they just asking, what's your deal? I mean, sometimes it's hard in a text message to figure out the context of versus having a true conversation with someone. A lot of times you can see when you're having a conversation with someone, you're like, oh, wait a second. Like they're not happy with me right now. Or, oh, okay, they're just kind of cutting up with me. But you can get that, and so sometimes just reading this, it's hard to know. So you read commentaries, and they're all over the map. They have 3 or 4 different ideas, and you just kind of pray about it, and come up with the one that you feel like that you think is best. But I believe what Jesus was saying right here is, let me ask you a question. Had they not spoke to you, had they not brought you to me, were you ever in fear that I was going to take over, that I was going to try and take you down and take Caesar down? I think that is what Jesus was asking. He said, sayest thou this thing of thyself? Was this a fear that you had? Was this a fear that you had, that I was the king of the Jews and I was gonna come in as a conqueror, and I was gonna conquer the Romans and take the Jews out from under Roman authority? Is that how you felt when you heard about me? When you heard about me whenever I was healing the blind and making the lame to walk and the dumb to talk and the deaf to hear? Was that what you thought? You're like, oh, I'll tell you what, this man right here is going to take my governorship away. He's going to take that away from me, and then he's going to take Caesar down, and the Romans are going to get kicked out. Is that what you thought? Or did someone else have to tell you? Did someone else have to say, this guy is trying to become king? This guy is trying to become king. This guy, again, when they accused him of being a king, when they accused him of that, they were trying to make Pilate, want to convict Jesus because he was trying to overthrow Rome. That's why they had to change their tactics. And so Jesus asked him, he said, sayest thou this of thyself, this thing of thyself, or did others tell it of me? And so he asked him a question, and you're going to see that a lot of times. Jesus doesn't, I know when I was a kid, you used to get in trouble for answering a question with a question. But Jesus answered a question with a question all the time. They ask him, a question. He's like, all right, you ask me a question, now I'm going to ask you a question. You answer my question, then I'll answer your question. And you see that over and over in the Gospels, where Jesus, when they were trying to trap Jesus, they'd ask him a question. He'd be like, okay, well, here's my question. Tell me about John. Tell me about John. Well, what do you think of John? Like, well, wait a second, because if we say this about John, then we're going to get in trouble, and the Jews and the people that like him are going to stone him. And then if we say, well, he was a prophet, then he's going to say, well, why aren't you doing what he said? And so Jesus answered questions with a question all the time. And so Jesus answered another question with a question. and he said, so Pilate answered, he said, am I a Jew? And so at this point, there's still some antagonism between Jesus and Pilate. I think Jesus wins Pilate over, even though it sounds so strange. It sounds so strange to be like, okay, the guy that he wins over is the guy that also ultimately had the power and authority to let him go, but chose not to. But we understand that he didn't have the power and authority to let him go, because God intended for Jesus to go to the cross. Jesus intended to go to the cross to suffer and die for mine and your sins. And so, but still, like I said, it seems to me at this point in time that there is still a little bit of frustration here with Pilate. And Pilate answered and said, am I a Jew? He's like, thine own nation and the chief priest hath delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? And so you see it right there that Pilate is still he's still leaning towards, he's still at this moment, he's still leaning, he had to have done something. Jesus had to have done something. There's no way that in the middle of the Passover, in the middle of the Jews celebrating the Passover, that all these chief priests and rulers are going to bring this guy to me and demand that he be killed, and he must have really done something. He had to. And so he said, what hast thou done? And Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. Now, again, like I said, I mean, here Pilate's like, are you a king? Are you a king? And Jesus first answers the question with a question, but then says, what hast thou done? And he said, all right, I'm going to go a little bit further. Like I said, you don't see this in the other Gospels. It just appears that Jesus doesn't say anything because they marvel when he doesn't try. Basically, he doesn't try to get out. He doesn't try to get himself released. And that's not what he's doing right here. He's not trying to get himself released. We understand that Jesus willingly was going to the cross. And so here, but he's going to have this conversation with Pilate. Why? Because Pilate was going to have to say, with an honest heart, I find no fault in him. I find no fault in him. And so when he said, what hast thou done? He still had the thought, he still had the thinking, he had to do something. But later he's going to get to the point where he says, all these things y'all are accusing him of, I find no fault in him at all. I find no fault in him at all. If you remember in Luke, I believe it says that Pilate gets so frustrated with him, he's like, why? What evil hath he done? And so here, Pilate says, he says, what hast thou done? Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this world. Now we're going back to this is religious. This is not earth. This is not earthly. This is not, I'm trying to take over and rule and reign. I'm not trying to take over for the Romans. That's not what I'm here to do. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews, but now is my kingdom not from hence. Jesus said, look, I have followers. I have followers, and I have lots of followers, and I don't want them to fight. That's not what I'm here. That's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to fight. I could have had them fight whenever Peter cut off the servant's ear there in the garden. Jesus could have had them armed to the teeth. He knew he was going to be betrayed. He knew he was going to be betrayed. He knew they were coming to get him. They could have been armed to the teeth, and Jesus could have escaped out of their hand like he did multiple times before. When they wanted to stone him, when they wanted to kill him, Jesus escaped out of their hands. He just slipped away. But that wasn't the time. Or if you remember, he told the Jews, he said, this is your hour and the power of darkness. But Jesus said, I don't want my servants to fight. I don't want my servants to fight. If I wanted my servants to fight, they could have fought, would have fought, and they would have won. But that's not what I'm here for. Pilate therefore said unto them, art thou a king then? So Pilate was impressed because he said, wait a second, I asked you if you're a king, and then you answered my question with a question, but then you said my kingdom is not of this world. So wait a second, are you a king? Are you a king? And Jesus answered, thou sayest that I'm a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. So now, Jesus, again, he said, I came to bear witness of the truth. So that's who I came to bear witness of. If you look in John chapter number 1, I believe it's verse 14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bare witness of him and cried, saying, this was he of whom I spake. He that cometh after me is preferred before me, for he was before me, and of his fullness have all we received, and grace. For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. In John 8, verse number 31. Then said Jesus to those Jews which believed on him, if you continue my word, then you're my disciples indeed, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And we know in John 14, verse number 6, Jesus saith unto them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. no man cometh unto the Father but by me. Jesus told Pilate, he said, the truth is that I didn't come to set up my kingdom right now. I didn't come to set up my kingdom right now. The truth is I came to die for sinners. The truth is I came to die for sinners. And so in verse number 38, Pilate saith unto him, what is truth? Pilate had a lot of questions for Jesus. And Jesus answered a few with a question. He answered a few. And this time, Pilate didn't wait around long enough to hear what Jesus had to say. He said, what is truth? Well, I'm just going to be honest with you, Cody. If you ever wanted to know that true answer of what truth was, you can look it up in Noah Webster's 1828. You can look it up through your Strong's Concordance. You can look it up through your Young's or your Concordance. You can look it up through all that stuff. But if you ever wanted the answer to what Jesus meant of truth in the previous verse, Pilate should have stuck around long enough to hear what Jesus had to say. He should have stuck around long enough to hear what Jesus had to say. And I fear that a lot of times, even in my own life, I might ask a question and I don't stick around long enough to hear the answer. In my prayer time, I might ask a question, but I don't stick around long enough to hear the answer. While I'm reading my Bible, I might have a question, but I don't stick around long enough to hear the answer. I go on about the things that I got to do, and I miss out on the answer that Jesus was about to give. Jesus could have answered this question. He could have answered this question to Pilate, but instead Pilate asked the question, what is truth? And walks out. I mean, can you imagine the rest of Pilate's life? Again, I mean, I don't know. Again, I tried to look it up, and it's, it's 2,000 year ago history, and there's all kinds of theories. There's like 3 different theories about how Pilate died. So it's really hard to figure out, anything because there's all kinds of different theories. One person said he was called back to Rome and he committed suicide in Rome. Another person says he died, that they exiled him to the Swiss Alps and he died in the Swiss Alps. And so it's really hard to figure that out. I don't know how long he lived after this. But can you imagine, he had Jesus right there in front of him, and he had Jesus where Jesus at this point in time was having a conversation with him, and he asked a question and didn't stick around long enough to get the answer. What is truth? And for the rest of his life, Pilate no doubt thought, I had him right there in front of me. Again, he's going to have to live with the grief and the regret that he consented to and allowed the Jews to have Jesus crucified. He's going to have to live with that. But here he is. His wife said, he said, don't have any dealings with this just man. Don't. And yet here he had the opportunity to hear what Jesus had to say. And instead of hearing what Jesus had to say, he just walked out. Pilate said to him, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews. So he was inside where he was talking to Jesus, and this, again, it appears like a private trial. It appears like at this point in time it was private. He didn't have the Jews just screaming false accusations. Didn't have the Jews screaming, crucify him at this moment. And so he walks out and he says, and he saith unto them, I find in him no fault at all. And again, in Matthew, I'm not going to read them right now, but Matthew 27:18, Luke 23:4, 23:14, 15, 22, 18:38, we're going to look at 19:4, 19:6. How many times does Pilate come back and tell the Jews, I find no fault at all? I find in him no fault at all. He was a spotless lamb. He was a spotless lamb. He was a sinless lamb. He was a perfect lamb. That even someone who had he had no skin in the game. I mean, Pilate really didn't have skin in the game in this religious argument. He didn't have. He was looking at Jesus, and he looked at them on the accusations they brought against him, and he came back with, "I find in him no fault at all." And so I believe it was about this time that he sends him over, that he sends him over to Herod. Then Herod sends him back. We're going to skip the last two verses about Barabbas. In verse number 19, it says, "Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him." Now again, a lot of this stuff is just it contradicts itself. It just completely contradicts itself. That here Pilate says, "I find no fault in him. I find no fault in him," and yet he scourges him. And I think we talked about that. I mean, again, none of us just wake up in the morning and say, "You know what, I'm going to spank my kid today just because he hasn't done anything. I'm just going to spank him." That's not how we work. And now, I've heard it said before, someone spanked their kid, and it's like, "What's that for?" I don't know, but I know you probably did something that you should do, and so I just spanked you for that. Well, that wasn't the case with Jesus. That probably was the case with me as a child. Had my mom just whipped me, had she whipped me, there were a lot of things that I did that I shouldn't have done that she didn't know about. And so there were a lot of things that I probably should have got a spanking for. Had she known about it, I would have got a spanking for, but she didn't know about it. So had she done that to me as a child, you know what, she'd have been fine. But not with Jesus. And so I believe, again, I think I read it to you last week, but in Acts, where Peter said that Pilate was determined to let him go. I believe that was the terminology, but he was determined to let him go. I believe this was Pilate's. He was trying to satisfy the Jews' lust for something to be done to Jesus, but he didn't understand how far that lust went. He did not understand that there was nothing he could do to Jesus besides killing him that was going to satisfy the chief priests and the rulers and the scribes and the Pharisees. There was nothing that he could do to Jesus that was going to satisfy them. But I think that he scourged him, unwittingly realizing that he was fulfilling prophecy. I think he scourged him in an effort to bring him back and bring his marred body back and say, look right here. Look what I've done to him. I haven't found any fault in him. Yet I'm going to take your accusation, because I'm not a religious Jew. I'm not a religious Jew, and I understand that this is truly not a Roman problem. This is a religion problem, but I'm going to take the fact that you say that he did something wrong, and that because you said he did something wrong, I'm going to scourge him, and surely that will be enough. It wasn't going to be enough. It was never going to be enough. If you look in your Bible to Isaiah chapter number 50, like I said, they didn't realize or Pilate doesn't realize that he's actually fulfilling prophecy. In Isaiah chapter 50, verse number 5, "The Lord God hath opened mine ear, and I was not rebellious, neither turned away back. I gave my back to the smiters, and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. I hid not my face from shame and spitting." And we know from other passages, we know that they also spit on Jesus. In Isaiah chapter number 53, in verse number 4, "Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. the chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Obviously, we understand that the cat of nine tails that they were using to whip Jesus is going to leave stripes. It's going to leave stripes across him. In Psalm chapter 129, in Psalm 129, verse number 3, let me get back there real quick. Psalm 129, verse number 3. It says, the plowers plowed upon my back, they made long their furrows. And then in Matthew chapter number 20, read right here. This is Jesus talking. Jesus telling his disciples, explaining his disciples, which is what we're going to look at next. In verse number 18, behold, we go up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests, unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles, that's Pilate, to mock. Obviously, we know they put a robe on him, they mocked and they spit, and to scourge, and to crucify him. And the third day he shall rise again. I'm not going to read the other two passages. The other two passages similar are Mark chapter number 10 and Luke chapter number 18, verse number 31 through 33. Similar passage saying the same thing. Jesus tells his disciples, I'm going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be betrayed, and I'm going to be delivered up to the chief priest, and I'm going to be delivered to the Gentiles. And when I'm delivered to the Gentiles, they're going to mock me, and they're going to scourge me. And so here, Pilate unwittingly is fulfilling prophecy. He's fulfilling prophecy that from the Old Testament, but also that Jesus gave to his disciples before he went to Jerusalem and said, hey, we're going to Jerusalem, and this is what's going to happen. And so in verse number 1, then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a robe. That's where he's being mocked. If you remember, they bow down to him, and they act like they're worshiping him. But they're not worshiping him. They're mocking him. They're making fun of him. They're making fun of the accusation that he was a king. And here they are. That he's just this meek and humble man that had went about doing nothing but good. And again, they don't understand, those Romans, they don't understand it. They only understand power. They only understand power and having power. And yet here's this man, and that he's just willingly allowing himself. Again, like I said, I mean, you take the war that's going on over there. The only thing those people understand is power. And yet here is Jesus, and Jesus already told Pilate, he said, my kingdom's not of this earth. He said, if it were, he said, my servants would fight. And yet here he is, and they're like, they don't understand. Why is he not fighting? Why is he not trying to release himself? Again, we're going to read it, obviously next week, but we're going to get to it. But we've looked at it before, where they marveled. They marveled because he wouldn't defend himself. Why? Because he was going to the cross for mine and your sins. Thank you.